Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us today because we've got a deeply complex and constantly evolving subject to unpack. We're going to do a strictly objective, analytical breakdown of how militant strategies in Jammu and Kashmir have recently evolved. You see, the security landscape there? It's shifting in real time. And to really grasp what's going on, we have to look way past the daily headlines and dig directly into the data and the changing tactical realities on the ground.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our clear roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to move logically through 5 key sections. First, we'll examine the actual tactical shift in strategy. Second, we'll analyze the drivers fueling this violence. Third, we'll look at the rethinking of security and technology. Fourth, we'll explore youth de-radicalization efforts. And finally, we'll review the proposed long-term political reforms.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, a shift in strategy, which is really a return to the 1990s.
Recently, there's been a really concerning spate of civilian killings, specifically targeting minorities and vital migrant workers. Now, security analysts point out this isn't unprecedented at all. It's actually a stark return to the tactics used back in the 1990s. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast it highlights between the old and new methods. The old strategy? It relied heavily on high-profile fida'in, or suicide attacks, carried out by full-time, highly publicized figures like Burhan Wani, guys that security agencies could easily track. But the new strategy? It's all about small, smuggled pistols. These attackers are just part-timers operating entirely under the radar. And instead of hitting hard military targets, they're choosing vulnerable soft targets, using this broad, loose network of ground workers. It's localized, it's scattered, and frankly, it's incredibly difficult to track down.
Right at the forefront of these attacks is a newly prominent group calling itself the Resistance Front, or TRF. And tactically speaking, this is fascinating. TRF intentionally drops Islamic references from its name and its messaging. Why would they do that? Well, it's a very active attempt to secularize their violence. They're trying to rebrand terrorism as a purely political cause rather than a religious war. To gain traction and recruit the youth, TRF even uploads live and counter videos to show off what they can do. But, don't let the shiny new name fool you. Intelligence clearly shows that the militants involved actually often belong to long-established groups like Hizbul Mujahideen and Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Moving right along to Section 2, drivers behind the violence. Let's analyze the root causes.
So we know how the tactics have changed, but to truly understand why, we have to dissect the complex array of systemic, logistical, and geopolitical root causes we've mapped out here. First off, there's a lot of frustration among terror handlers following the abrogation of Article 370 and the tightening of law and order that came after. Second is a major logistical issue. These recent attacks are fueled by small arms being seamlessly smuggled across the border using drones. Third, the government's plans to rehabilitate and resettle Kashmiri pundits have stirred up local unease over property disputes dating back to the 90s. And finally, there's a really crucial geopolitical driver. A chunk of the security forces was actually redeployed from the Kashmir Valley over to the India-China border in Ladakh, and that shift created a physical operational opening for these small-scale attacks to happen.
But beyond the logistics of weapons and troop movements, there is a deep psychological and societal driver at play. Our source material highlights a really critical quote regarding local sentiment, noting that narratives of humiliation, shame, and injustice have been strongly entrenched. Basically, there is a documented perception on the ground of shrinking political space, and that kind of environment breeds what our sources call a lost generation of youth. We're talking about young people who've missed out on education, who lack steady employment, and who, having grown up witnessing violence, become highly susceptible to radicalization.
So the crucial point is this: how do you counter an invisible, under-the-radar threat? Think about it. When the attackers are part-timers, carrying easily hidden smuggled pistols, and just blending perfectly back into the civilian population, traditional heavy-handed military crackdowns just don't work the same way anymore. The state absolutely has to evolve its approach.
Which brings us nicely to Section 3, rethinking security and technology. It's all about smart versus hard approaches.
To counter this new wave of violence, the state is shifting its policy response away from relying solely on a hard, heavy troop presence and moving toward innovative security. When we contrast these approaches, you still have those vital on-the-ground measures, things like formally registering migrant workers and bumping up patrols in minority areas. But on the flip side are the critical tech interventions. India obviously cannot afford to completely demilitarize the valley, but mass troop deployment feeds directly into that occupier narrative we talked about. So the solution being proposed is smart rather than hard. This means putting unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, and drones in the sky over peaceful areas to keep watch without leaving a heavy physical footprint on the streets. It also means utilizing artificial intelligence to monitor and counter extremist content online, while simultaneously flooding social media with peace messaging.
Specifically, security agencies are being advised to follow a precise set of tactical steps. Step 1. Get those UAVs deployed to conduct surveillance and maintain law and order from the sky. Step 2. Refocus border management away from just physical infiltration and aim specifically at disrupting the supply chain of small arms and those incoming smuggling drones. And Step 3. Aggressively trace and identify the terror handlers and their sources of financial funding. If you cut off the money and the guns, you stifle the part-time terror networks before they even start.
Okay, moving into Section 4, De-radicalization and youth, winning hearts and minds.
We have to remember that security is really only half the battle. The focus absolutely must shift to the critical human element, and this brilliantly illustrates how a truly holistic approach stops extremist ideology before it even takes root by simply providing better alternatives. This includes working closely with religious scholars to promote a liberal version of Sufi Islam that is historically tied to the region. It involves creating very consistent counter-narratives on social media. Crucially, it means ensuring uninterrupted virtual education so that when periods of unrest do happen, they don't create a vacuum of idle time for kids. And finally, state-sponsored skill initiatives like Udaan for graduates and Himayat for school dropouts are seen as absolutely essential to provide real gainful employment for this generation.
Just to put the sheer scale of this state effort into perspective, consider this massive figure, over 80,000 crores. This represents the Prime Minister Development Package announced back in 2015 towards special assistance for the development of infrastructure in J&K. I bring this number up just to anchor the immense scale of the financial commitment being made here. It's a very real recognition that long-term stability isn't just about security forces. It requires heavy, sustained economic investment.
Now, building all of this into the broader sociopolitical picture requires addressing justice. An incredibly critical observation from our source material centers on the fact that in the past, cases against alleged extrajudicial conduct by armed forces have sometimes been dismissed or suspended by tribunals, ostensibly to avoid damaging the morale of the troops deployed there. However, the source stresses that the state faces a really delicate balancing act today. It has to address these justice narratives to rebuild trust with the local population, but it has to do so without crippling the operational morale of the troops who are actively fighting militancy. It is, without a doubt, a highly sensitive tightrope walk.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Long-Term Political Reforms, the Path to Sustainable Peace.
Ultimately, all these tech interventions and massive economic packages, they must be paired with systemic political rejuvenation. With the loss of statehood, the political focus on the ground shifted heavily to district development councils, or DDCs. The main goal here is grassroots good governance. The idea is that average Kashmiris, who might be totally tired of bureaucratic red tape, can find actual hope in elected, local leaders. But for this to work, these representatives absolutely must be shielded from being targeted by militants, and they have to be fully empowered with true political and financial jurisdiction. Because only when the locals feel they are experiencing efficient grassroots governance, meaning a feeling of being governed by us, can those violent narratives be truly permanently dismantled.
Summarizing the high-level policy recommendations from all the data, the essential long-term goals for restoring democratic normalcy become pretty clear. First, there has to be extensive consensus building by actively engaging all sections of political opinion in J&K. Second, there is a very strong recommendation for the early return of statehood. And third, there must be a definitive early consensus and resolution regarding the property problems of Kashmir pundits, effectively removing that lingering point of friction entirely.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. We've seen the shift from high-profile terror to these under-the-radar pistol attacks. We've seen the proposed pivot from hard troop deployments to smart AI and surveillance drones, paired with real grassroots political empowerment. But the ultimate question remains, can these smart security innovations and long-term political rejuvenation efforts move fast enough to outpace the new, highly localized wave of radicalization? It is a complex, ongoing race between hard security, technological adaptation, and the absolute essential need for human trust. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and thank you so much for learning with me today.